All right. Thanks everybody for coming this afternoon. I'm going to attempt to cover the two announcements that were released a little bit earlier today, as well as talk about some of the events over the past week and a half, and also some things prior to that, and then I'll leave time and try to answer some questions. I'm going to start with the announcement that the University of Iowa's Office of General Counsel did announce that it has retained the services of Hush Blackwell out of Kansas City. They'll be conducting an independent review of the issues and allegations related to racial disparities within the football program. The review will begin immediately. It will not be conducted by me or anybody else in athletics, and in fact it will report directly to the president. Of course, we'll be available to answer any questions, provide any information, and certainly everyone has agreed to cooperate. On the one hand, we don't need an independent review to tell us that we have issues. We know we have issues, and we have began taking steps to improve and move forward. However, the independent review is important in order to look into specific concerns that have been brought forward, to identify or clarify, maybe expand on some of the things that we are aware of. So that will begin. It's been shared with me that it will take weeks, not months. No hard date on finishing. That'll sort of depend on, I'm sure that will depend on where it heads. I'm going to move now to, over the weekend, the separation agreement that was finalized with Chris Doyle, the head strength coach. That process began with a discussion between Chris and I, and then the terms were discussed over a few-day period and then finalized yesterday on Sunday. I can tell you that during this past week and a half, I've been doing a lot of listening and thinking about important steps to move forward, and that's going to be important. And as part of that, I would share with you a few things. First of all, clearly there's still a lot of work to be done. One of the things, as difficult as it's been, I have really been encouraged and appreciated the deep and very difficult conversations that we've been having. The one that stands out to me the most is a team meeting that occurred a week ago today. And in that team meeting, there was some very difficult and challenging but important conversations had. It started out like really most meetings, team meetings that I've been associated with as a student athlete or as a staff member over the years. It was Kirk talking a little bit about the issues that had come up, and then I addressed the team with some of the issues that had come up. And then it probably would have been a normal meeting by normal standards if it would have ended there, but thankfully it didn't end there. Thankfully, some of the current players began really asking tough questions. At first they were directed at Kirk or me, but then an amazing thing happened. Then it became, they were talking to each other, student athletes, coaches, staff members, and again, it was a very emotional and difficult meeting, but very, very important to getting started. So I'm grateful for the current student athletes that spoke up, and also for the former student athletes who spoke up really about a week and a half ago. So sometime during that week, as I was thinking through and trying to come up with next steps, I did come to the conclusion that one of those steps was that a separation with Coach Doyle was the thoughtful and sensible thing to do. Kirk and I talked, and we were both in full agreement that was the case. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I ended up speaking with Chris first, and we just moved through that process. I can tell you this was not a decision that I made lightly, and it is just one piece of a plan that's going to be needed for us to move forward. I have some other comments I'm going to make, but before I do, one of the things that I wanted to do, and it's really important to me, is to say I'm sorry to former student athletes, coaches, staff, current student athletes, anybody who's had a negative experience with Iowa football. When I say negative, if you felt mistreated, misled, discriminated against, whatever the case, I truly am sorry. We want everybody who participates in our program to have a great experience academically, athletically, and socially. So now let me. What I'd like to do at this point is go back prior to a week and a half ago and talk a little bit about what some things that have been occurring over the past year and a half in the athletic department and in the football program specifically. In the spring of 2018, we were reviewing the most recent graduation rates, and we saw that our African American male student athletes across the department were graduating at a rate lower than their white peers. That's not new news at Iowa, and it's not unique to Iowa. Those statistics are similar at a lot of places around the country, but that was a moment in time where we decided we wanted to do something about it. And so, at my urging and the department moving forward, a diversity task force was created. And the initial charge of that task force was to look into that specific issue, the graduation gap between our black student athletes, males mostly, and our white student athletes. And so we began that process. And then in early 2019, the task force came forward and shared a report. And the report summarized some issues or concerns that were raised during interviews with student athletes, coaches, and staff. And the key theme in that report indicated that many of our African American student athletes did not feel comfortable being their authentic self. The interviews were anonymous, and they didn't name specific individuals. However, there were concerning statements like, I felt like I had to put a mask on to check my identity at the door. I was told by my coach to change my hairstyle because it didn't fit the Iowa culture. One student athlete said a staff member cursed and yelled, degrading an African American student athlete in front of his peers. The task force study that was done throughout the whole athletic department, not just football. And while no teams or individuals were singled out in the report, it was reported verbally that many of these comments were coming from football. So as a department, including football, we began to put a plan in place to address these issues. I'm going to share with you some of the changes that we had been making and were making, but before I do, I'm going to pause here and just share with you that and acknowledge to you that the events of the past few weeks nationally, and then specifically the numerous comments that have been shared by former or current student athletes within our football program, have made it clear to me, and I'm sure others in our department, and I know some others in our department, that the changes we had been making weren't enough, and they weren't happening fast enough. Some of the examples of the changes that occurred prior to last week. In July of 2019, we hired Broderick Binns as Interim Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I think many know that Broderick is a former player at Iowa and has been a staff member at Iowa. We indicated that there would be additional educational and training throughout the athletic department, including football, in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Kirk began meeting with the African American student athletes to discuss the concerns and talk about how we can move forward. Liz Tovar's office hired 2 PhD students. There's a long-standing Big Ten diversity intern plan, and we used to have them spread out throughout the athletic department. In this particular year, Liz hired 2 of them in her area, in the area of student services. And I know at least a big part of their job was working with the African American student athletes. We annually bring in an outside consulting group. The company's name it used to be the Dan Beebe Group. I know they have a different name now, but Dan Beebe is the principal. And what he does is he goes around the country and he speaks to staffs and student athletes. And this is an area where he talks to them without coaches in the room, without staff in the room. First of all, hear if they have anything they want to bring to him. Now, he's an outsider, so we don't necessarily expect that they'll bring anything to him, but he opens that opportunity up. And then he describes to them that when you do have a concern, if it's something that you're not comfortable going to your coach, or for that matter, going to anybody in the athletic department, he provides them direct information about other places they can go, on campus mostly, or potentially in the community. So we were doing that. We continue to do that. And then every year we have an anonymous survey that student athletes can fill out and voice their concerns. And then a group that I know some of you are aware of, it's called the President's Committee on Athletics, the PCA. They do interviews with student athletes and to ask them about their experience and to talk to them, see if they have questions or concerns, especially as they're leaving the program. They're involved in those interviews. So these are just a few of the examples. There are more things that are included in our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. And prior to last week, I knew we were doing these things, and I had convinced myself that we were doing enough. And frankly, the past few weeks has been a wake-up call for me, I know, for others in the department. I know Kirk and I have obviously had numerous conversations over the past couple of weeks, but for everybody in Iowa football and Iowa athletics. So we knew we were doing things. I'm just going to speak for myself. I thought we were on a path of making things better and doing the right things. The things that I've heard in the last week and a half especially, clearly they weren't enough, and they weren't happening fast enough. So where do we go from here? As I mentioned earlier, we need to create a path forward. I mean, we are listening, we're going to continue to listen, and there's still a lot to be done there. There's still a lot of difficult conversations to have. There have been some really difficult conversations so far. I'm going to pause right there and just, I was a student athlete, and I've been now involved with college athletics for many, many years. And over the years, I've had numerous conversations about I've had numerous conversations about racism, social injustice, but I would describe those as probably more surface conversations. You know, I think a lot of people are willing to say that, excuse me, I think there are a lot of people willing to say that racism is ugly and a bad thing. But the conversations that we've all been having nationally and that I've been having, have gone so much deeper than that. So, as we go forward, we're committed to change and improvement. I promise you we're going to make mistakes. And when we do, we'll correct them. I can tell you also they won't be perfect. There's always going to be differing opinions about what we should do, and a desire to have it done right away. And I know how it works. We can make some changes immediately, but change is going to take time. So here are some steps that we have taken or that will be taken. It's been mentioned already, an independent review, and from that review we'll receive a report, we'll learn, we'll determine any additional actions that need to be taken in response. We'll continue to listen. One of the things that I've known, I mean this isn't new, but we have to find better ways, and that is to make sure that people have a place to go if they don't feel comfortable I would say, I normally say to student athletes, 99% of the things you need to resolve, whatever they are done between you and your coach. But if there becomes a situation where it's something you can't resolve or aren't comfortable resolving with your coach, we have to make sure that there are other places. We've said that, we've tried to make that clear, but clearly we need to get better at that. Kirk has announced that he's forming a former player council to help him make changes and move forward with his team. Kirk and his coaches and staff will work on and have been working on specific team changes within their program. I've already seen a lot of changes in a week, but clearly that's just the beginning. And I can tell you that Kirk has expressed how grateful he is, and I haven't been involved in all of their breakout meetings. I was just involved in that team meeting. But for the past couple of weeks, before last Friday and since last Friday, that he's relied on a lot of really candid and difficult feedback from his staff, and he will continue to do that. Broderick Binns will take leadership of the Diversity Task Force. As an aside, Broderick reports directly to Liz Tovar, a member of our senior staff. And in addition to having a direct report, many of the senior staff members on my team have an indirect or dotted line to other areas on campus. Broderick has full access and support from the university's diversity, equity, and inclusion staff, in addition to reporting directly to Liz Tovar. And Broderick and I have had numerous conversations over the last couple of weeks. Broderick and some others put together, again, prior to last Friday, put together a town hall meeting on racism and social injustice with our staff, with our student athletes. And Broderick, because he played here and because he's very familiar with the University of Iowa, loves Iowa, I know he's going to do a great job. But the Diversity Task Force, he'll oversee that. It was never disbanded, but it wasn't, it hadn't had a meeting for a while. He's going to continue that group, make sure that the representation of the membership it needs to be and will be and has been diverse, but also represents all the constituents. We need to make sure that that's represented. And then allowing them to talk about maybe a new charge. And one of the new charges is having that group be a conduit or a place, maybe that's a place where our student athletes can go. And they get to know the individuals on this group. And they earn trust with this group. And so they become a place where our student athletes know they can go. And they won't replace University of Iowa resources, but maybe they become a bridge to those resources. And they also, I envision them working with the PCA, the President's Committee on Athletics, and partnering with them in the student well-being, student athlete well-being committee. So I guess what I'm saying is the Diversity Task Force will remain intact. It might be slightly modified or take on a different charge, but I'll let the task force come up with that, and they'll have access. I'll meet with them when they want to meet with me, report to me. They'll have access and report to the president, and as I mentioned, have access and report to the PCA and or the university's diversity, equity, and inclusion team. This was actually an idea in one of the conversations I had with one of our former student athletes. He wasn't necessarily suggesting this particular group, but he was suggesting a group. He acknowledges, this student acknowledges that we've tried to have these conversations about having a place to go. But not yet having that truly safe place where they can go and express if they have a concern. So I want the task force to help fill that role. And then looking at all of our current education and training program that we do throughout the athletic department, and we do a lot of it, and just seeing if we need to modify or redo the effective programming going forward. So a few final thoughts, and then I'll open it up to questions. I have learned a lot the last few weeks. I am listening. I continue to listen. And I've had, as I mentioned, I've had a lot of conversations about this topic over the years. But for the first time in my life, these conversations have gone so much deeper. And I don't know if that's the experience that the rest of America is having, but as difficult as it is, and you can tell by my emotion it's difficult, I'm excited that it'll give us a chance to move forward and get better as a country. I'm not deflecting what we need to work on at Iowa. I'm going to focus on that. I can't change the whole world, as I've told some of our students and our staff, but we can change where we're at here. So appropriately so, we're focusing on the difficult issues in Iowa football. And what I'm about to say doesn't deflect that, and it doesn't take away from what I've just been describing. I do remain confident that Kirk Ferentz can lead this team moving forward. And many of the attributes that we're all familiar with over the last 20 years, the on-field success, the community service, the personal development of players, providing NFL opportunities and access, dedication, perseverance, the WAVE, the Kid Captain program, all of those things are still there. And they're still all a part of the foundation and who Kirk is. Again, that doesn't excuse what we're focused on or what we're talking about, but the foundation is still strong. And so we need to rebuild trust, we need to get better, and then we can return to all those positives upon which the foundation was built. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit more than I normally do, and I'd open it up for questions.